Ago, I read that President Eisenhower expressed the hope that by election time in 1954, the subject of communism would be a dead and forgotten issue. The raw, harsh, unpleasant fact is that communism is an issue.
McCarthyism, First Amendment in a Time of Turmoil, by EKemp. McCarthyism can be described as the period of time starting February 9, 1950, when the U.S. government dismissed Americans' First Amendment rights in the name of national security. Americans were persecuted for holding unpopular opinions or questioning the government. Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin was at the forefront of the investigations led by the House Un-American Activities Committee and the Senate Permanent Investigations Subcommittee, which he was chairman of. Before jumping into the investigations, we must first get an idea of what caused this panic. After World War II, tensions between the U.S. and the Soviet Union ran high as many people in both the American government and the American public feared communist infiltration of American life. This fear was worsened by the rise in social justice movements and the growth of the American labor movements and unions. In 1940, Congress passed the Smith Act, which made it illegal to advocate the violent overthrow of the U.S. government. In 1946, the House Un-American Activities Committee was made permanent. Its purpose was to investigate the activities of people accused of having communist ties. As a response to the fear of communists in the federal government, President Harry S. Truman issued the Loyalty Acts on March 21, 1947, which prompted investigations into government employees. Over 5 million employees were looked into, and around 2,700 were dismissed, and around 12,000 resigned. Accusations of communists in the State Department grew and eventually led to action being taken by Senator Joseph McCarthy of Wisconsin. In a Lincoln Day speech at Wheeling Thursday night, I stated that the State Department harbors a nest of communists and communist sympathizers who are helping to shape our foreign policy. These words are part of a telegram sent from Senator McCarthy to President Truman 2 days after McCarthy gave a speech at Wheeling, West Virginia, where he claimed American traitors would make the U.S. lose the Cold War. This speech prompted the beginning of many hearings and investigations by the House Un-American Activities Committee and the Senate Permanent Investigations Subcommittee, which would lead to fear and suppression of many groups and people. Following his re-election, McCarthy became the chair of the Committee on Government Operations of the Senate and of its Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, and launched a series of hearings. One of the groups targeted by these investigations were labor unions. During this time, many labor unions reached their peak in membership. Despite this, many labor unions were placed under close surveillance, and leadership put down any voices or actions that could be viewed as them taking communist actions. The CIO ended up purging 11 unions from their roles and around 1.25 million workers from its membership. Congress also investigated social justice groups during the look for communists. In 1951, W.E.B. Du Bois was arrested for promoting Americans to be passive in the face of the Cold War, but was later acquitted. Due to the fact that the American Communist Party promoted racial equality, groups like the NAACP did their best to distance themselves from these groups by expelling some far-left activists from their membership. McCarthy also targeted the U.S. Army with the investigations during the Army McCarthy hearings by the Senate Permanent Investigations Subcommittee.
I'd like to finish this. Mr. Welch here has been filibustering this hearing. He's been talking day after day about the way he wants to get anyone tainted with communism out before sundown.
In 1953, McCarthy had begun an investigation into whether or not there were communists and communist sympathizers in the Army at Fort Monmouth, and his promotion of an alleged communist into the rank of major. McCarthy became agitated when he was not given further information. In response, the Army accused McCarthy's lawyer, Roy Cohn, of trying to force the Army into giving his friends preferential treatment. This led to the start of the widely televised Army McCarthy hearings in the Senate Permanent Investigations Subcommittee. McCarthy had temporarily stepped down as chair of the committee at this time. During the hearings, McCarthy acted aggressively towards witnesses, and many of his fellow senators began to become dissatisfied with his accusations and conduct. On June 9, 1954, during a hearing, Army lawyer Joseph Welch was accused by McCarthy of having associates with communist ties. Welch responded, and when McCarthy tried to continue his attack, Welch stated,
"Have you no sense of decency, sir?"
Adding to McCarthy's decline was a March 9, 1954 broadcast on CBS titled See It Now, hosted by Edward R. Murrow. Murrow showed the American public McCarthy's behavior using audio and video clips of the senator. In his closing for the show, Murrow stated, quote, "This is not the time for those who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent." As a result of these hearings and the disastrous effect on McCarthy's popularity it had, he was censured by the Senate on December 2, 1954, for his, quote, non-cooperation with and abuse of the Subcommittee on Privileges and Elections in 1952, and for, quote, for abuses of the Senate Select Committee to Study Censure of 1954. In 1957, the Supreme Court decided in the Yates v. United States case a distinction between advocacy for abstract political principles and advocating for concrete political actions. It also stated that the government must prove someone was advocating for direct action and not just promoting beliefs for it to be criminalized under the Smith Act. The anti-communist fear in the United States at the time produced a forced conformity to the popular viewpoints of the time. Many left-wing political groups lost their supporters and were not able to advocate for their ideals like they had once done so in the past. Federal workers who had been dismissed or resigned over communist accusations lost their livelihoods and future. This era was also a continuation of taking measures to limit Americans' First Amendment rights in the name of national security. This was similar to what had been done with the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798 and the Espionage and Sedition Acts of World War I. No matter what is going on at a time, every American should have the right to express their opinions and views without fear of persecution, even if they are unpopular. It is also our responsibility as citizens to call out suppression of free speech when we see it and to make sure that all Americans have a voice.